Hello and welcome to a special episode of Material Matters with me, Grant Gibson. As regular listeners will know, the idea behind the show is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. Now, generally we record these in our guest's studio, workshop, occasionally even their homes. However, as we're all in lockdown, that isn't possible. So we're doing this over the internet instead and keeping our fingers crossed that the technology works. Nevertheless, it gives me huge pleasure to talk to Gareth Neal. The furniture designer's work generally pokes around the possibilities of craft, often investigating the handmaid's relationship with technology. Neal first came to prominence in 2007 with his Anne side table, where a traditional piece of furniture was almost hidden in a block of wood. Many people assumed the piece was made using a high-tech CNC machine, but the original version at least was actually assiduously fashioned by hand. Subsequently, he's gone on to redesign the traditional Orkney chair, collaborate with Zaha Hadid, and has even attempted to reinvent the wheel. His most recent pieces have been 3D printed in sand, but the material he's best known for is undoubtedly timber. Gareth, thanks so much for doing this.
Absolute pleasure. Nice to be here.
So this podcast is emphatically not about the virus. I mean, really, it's meant as an escape from the news we see every day. That said, we can't really ignore it. So do you have a COVID-19 routine, Gareth?
Yeah, I guess a little bit of paranoia at about 6 o'clock in the evening to whether I've got it or not. But generally it centres around childcare and trying to fit everything in around a child that's no longer at nursery and a partner who's also got a business to run. So, juggling, I think is the word. There's no routine to it.
Because your partner Ruth is a top-notch jeweler, right?
She is, yeah. So she's been running quite a big business, so she's been trying to keep that all going. So it's not been that easy.
Yeah. So are you still able to get into the workshop? What's your setup there?
Well, it's about 5 minutes from home, so it's very close. So, and I don't really share it with anybody, so it's pretty isolated. So actually, I can get there if I have time to get there, but time is the problem at the moment. So, but I sort of always desperate to get over there if I can. So, lots to get on with, but not very easy to get on with it.
So, in the usual run of events, I'd be recording this with you in the workshop. But maybe for listeners, can you give us a sense of what it looks like?
Well, it's down an alley behind some Georgian houses in quite a suburb of East London, just off Kingston Road, and it's a very small old Victorian printing factory. So it's very small, but quite charming, with a nice yard out the front, which gives me a space to store lumber and lumps of timber. And then the workshop itself is got some basic woodwork machinery in it, so band saws, chop saws, dimension saw, all the saws, pillar drill, workbench, and then I've kind of made a sort of glass office for myself inside the space with some soundproof glass, so I can also have a little space for designing and thinking and all the kind of office work.
It isn't full of CNC machines.
There's no CNC machine. It's very low tech. I mean, it's very basic, really. Actually, it's very, nothing, no different to a workshop would have looked years ago, really. The most high tech thing is a laser printer. That's about it.
So, Gareth, this podcast is ostensibly about your relationship with timber. But your latest work, these big ribbed vessels, are made from a kind of a black-coloured sand. Was it a deliberate decision to shift materials?
No, not really. It was an opportunity that sort of came my way that I saw and thought, I'd like to investigate that. So they had actually emailed me about seeing whether I wanted to explore and inquire with this material. So I cautiously sort of progressed with that idea, and I had in fact already had these designs worked up and had been looking into making them in wood at the same time, and it was just proving ridiculously expensive and highly complex to make them, and it just didn't seem the right material to make them in wood. So when these guys approached me and I got the samples, I thought there really was something in that. And they said that
Who were these guys?
Well, they're based in Europe, and they're sort of a small new outfit who are sort of using the printing technology from car casting. So they cast. Basically, the machines make sand molds for the automotive industry, and then they're kind of post-processing these prints to cure them to make them hard. So yeah.
But you're not giving me a name. Is there a reason for that?
No. Yeah. I know it's relatively new technology, and I want to be the guy to have a really good crack at exploring it. And they're findable. People can find them if they want to. I want them to succeed as a business. However, I want to delay the output as long as I can, because it is exciting, and there's lots of opportunity there with it. So I'd like to sort of have a good crack at getting some objects out and using the process before lots of people do it. Sort of I think that's fair enough, really, to sort of delay, to have a bit of a moment with it, but won't be able to stop it.
No, fair enough. So the form of the vessels themselves, that wasn't dictated by the sand. You could have done them in wood had it been economically viable.
Yes, but it would have been a real challenge to have done them in wood, and people were very, the machinists were very cautious about it. And I think, anyone who has got the sort of CNC technology to have a go at these things knows that the potential risk of failure is so high that it kind of makes prices and the risk for them quite astronomical. So and the other nature of these vessels, and I mean I've done a lot of vessels over the years now, is that the thing with wood is trying to make them hollow. So I don't see the point in making a vessel if it's not hollow. So there's an extra challenge there when you're milling something out from a solid. So actually a 3D printer building something from loose sand means that we can make things hollow, which I think is sort of kind of that's what a vessel is about, really. It has to have a void in the middle of it.
Yeah, for the listener, can you explain a little bit about the process?
Yeah, I can try. It's quite hard to explain because it sort of. I have been out there, and I literally just been out there about 4 weeks ago. So I went to visit the space, and it's a large industry, sort of large factory warehouse space with several of these machines. But an incredibly large casket rolls into the machine, and then a layer of sand is sort of poured over the casket, back and forth, and then while it's doing that, it's adding an additive to the sand to make it hold together where your object is. So eventually, then after the 24 hours of this process, you can unearth the casket, which is basically just looks like a massive block of sand, and then you literally dig and excavate the objects out of the sand, and it's really quite amazing because you don't quite know where they are in this bed of sand, and they've got these hoovers, and you've got lots of different brushes, and to slowly kind of reveal the object, and then you have to very, very carefully take these things out of the sand, because at that point they're not they're still very delicate, and then you've got to give them a little bit longer time to cure, and then they have to go through this post-processing process.
I mean, on this occasion, obviously, you were completely removed from the making process. I mean, that must have been a little strange, I'm guessing.
A little strange, but quite liberating, really. It was just really quite wonderful just to receive something in the post that you designed and didn't shed, blood and sweat over. It's not my normal practice. And the thing with you making things digitally, actually, whether or not they're in wood or they're in sand, once you press the button and the process starts, it's kind of out of your hands anyway. So in some ways, it's similar to other digital processes. It was just the fact that this was in another country, and some people doing it that you'd never met. But we did lots and lots of sampling and evolution of the design and the shape and the form and the contours and the intensity of the fins that go across it. So we knew what we were getting, and this process gave us the space to be able to do all the sampling and the moquettes in the actual material, which would not have afforded us that. So it was quite strange, but quite brilliant as well.
Because, as I suspect we'll see, technology and your relationship with it has always played kind of an important part in your work. The hack chair, which sees an archetypal Georgian chair trying to burst out of a block of oak that you did a year or two ago, was created both by hand and a CNC robotic arm. So, this sense of technology is very much part of your craft, right?
Yeah, I think it's become what I'm most known for, I suppose, is that trying to create a story around the process and the material, and try and, highlight the idea that digital manufacturing is craft. Or I feel like it's a form of craft. Though these tools are bigger than I could fit in my workshop, they're just another tool to me that's accessible to use. So, and I've found that to be my area, really, that there's great opportunity in this industrial kit to play with that is relatively unexplored. And I'm really excited by it. I find it the cutting edge of craft in a way where, we can play all we like with old-fashioned tools, but there's only so many ways that, they're fairly explored. Whereas actually, it's kind of virgin territory, really. So I enjoy that. It's more pioneering, I suppose.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because obviously there was this kind of fetishization of 3D printing a few years ago, and you had lots of pieces of work coming out that kind of looked like you kind of knew that it had been 3D printed, and it seemed to me that the designer or maker had become rather obsessed by the tool. You're keen to get away from that, I'm guessing.
Well, I think, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have gone into the world of 3D printing, I suppose, if I didn't think the result had some sensitivity, the material had some sensitivity to touch and feel and the senses. And I felt like this material, ticked enough boxes for me to warrant making that jump away from wood into this kind of completely hands-off world. But I don't think, my experience with making things and my experience with objects and understanding of a material, I think only adds to my ability to design something so it has some tacit qualities and has some sort of attraction to the hand when it's finished. And that's what I try and do. And I think those kind of objects that you refer to, often they are people who are really loving the process of the computer and the computer world. And yes, there was an aesthetic that looked very similar, and I think it is a trap. Digital processes often have a certain aesthetic. They have a mark in time. So I think it is something to try and avoid. And I think that's, with the hack chair, that's why there's a conflation between not just relying on the digital technology itself. To add another layer, a hand layer on top, a sensitivity to the material, a touch of craftsmanship, gives these objects an extra emotional connection, and I think that's what I did. You mentioned Anne, but the real piece I feel that I made that had the real breakthrough sort of beyond Anne was actually the George chest of drawers. It was a step beyond the Anne table where I smashed away the corner of it, and it was that moment, that element of the unknown, that I introduced to the George chest of drawers, that a CNC machine or you could never draw in a computer added. And it was that helped you make the journey from the archetype of the Georgian chest of drawers to the digital exterior aesthetic. And in a way, I do that with the hack chair. I'm also trying to do that, and it's by trying to create ways to give the wood a bit of space of its own. So on the hack chair, we mill these big lumps of green timber, so they're sopping wet, literally, as the 7-axis robot arm mills away the wood. It's spitting with water. So these bits of lumber, and also I might add, these large bits of lumber are the waste product of the timber industry. They're not. They're the stumps or the crowns of a tree. So the timber industry or the furniture industry doesn't generally want. So they're wet, and then as the robot's doing its thing, they start moving, and it takes on a bit of a life of its own. And we have to then dry them out, and then as the drying process happens, they split even more. So it's about designing in a space for the objects to do a little bit of something of their own, to give them their own personal character. And that's the method I've used on the hack chair. So,
Gareth, let me take you kind of right back, as it were. When did your relationship with wood begin? Were you always going to be a designer?
I've never really thought I'd do anything much else, but there was a time when I quite fancied being a war photographer, and I really like the idea of being a potter.
Those are two contrasting professions.
Yeah, exactly. Both quite fragile existence, but yeah, I opted for furniture because a mate of mine at the time said, "Well, you could do photography as a hobby. You can't do furniture." So I just followed his comment, really. But also, this wonderful teacher of mine, and now this would never happen in a modern day world, he knew I just wanted to go traveling, and I think my mum had been really worried about me just bumming out, basically, with my camera. And anyway, this teacher, he got Alan Truman, I should give him a shout. He literally said, "Well, why don't you come and have a look at this course?" And he got me on the back of his motorbike and drove me to High Wycombe on the back of his motorbike to see the course. Now, you wouldn't be allowed to do that now, would you? But,
no.
But that particular teacher just gave me an insight into what the world, I didn't even know you could do degrees in furniture design at that time. So the minute I saw the course, I didn't want to do anything else, really.
But even before that, were you making as a child?
Yeah, my mum recounts stories of me making an angle poise lamp in cardboard. I made a bird table in wood.
What age were you when you made the bird table?
6 or 7. I'm not really sure. Maybe about 7. And it was 2-story. And our cat used to get in the middle of the bird table and then hope that the cat would get a bird on the top of the bird table. But yeah, it lasted a few years. So yeah, I had made things in wood, but I'm not from a family of carpenters or chippies.
Well, no, because your dad was an archaeological illustrator, right?
Yeah, he ran the drawing office for English Heritage during the winter months, And in the summer months, he would run excavations, mainly on Roman sites. So, yeah, we were surrounded, in the winter months, we were surrounded by pots and artifacts that he was drawing or illustrating. And in the summer months, we were on excavations, living in tents for the school holidays. So, and I would inevitably be running around the spoil heaps, digging up or finding bits of Roman pottery that the diggers had missed. And then as I got a little bit older, I was working on site from about, I don't know, I think me and my brother shared a pay packet of one of the, the hired hands. And yeah, so that from about 12 or 13, I was, the summer months, I was actually working for my dad.
If I was an amateur psychologist, I'd be suggesting this notion of objects emerging from blocks of wood, or even digging out sand from 3D printed sand, might have something to do with growing up on archaeological sites. But would that be a leap too far, do you think?
Well, it does have some, yeah, I think so. And my dad's fascination with Roman mosaics also, I've done work with marquetry, and that's, and the patterns of marquetry I've been inspired by. So, yeah, I think without a question of doubt, the idea of the reveal is something that I grew up with, and I absolutely loved digging skeletons as a child, and as you slowly worked your way through the rib cage and down the bones on the finger, I would love it. And or revealing a pot, was something really special, because you'd have to try and keep the object intact so it didn't fall apart, so they could photograph it or get it to the very point that they could lift the pot. So, on a site that's, 3/4 excavated, you'd have all these objects half appearing out of the soil. So I'd say, I think your observation is correct. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, as you talk about, you studied 3D design and crafts at Buckinghamshire College in the early 90s. I mean, college had a focus on making. Was that always going to be an important facet of your work?
Well, I guess so. I mean, I was quite young. I was young to go to university and didn't do any foundation course or anything. So I guess I had no idea, and I was pretty carefree, and I just enjoyed making things, and I really enjoyed the workshop space, and hanging out with people and getting on with something and chatting while you were making. And I think I fell in love with the atmosphere of a workshop just as much as I enjoy sort of wood, but do actually find wood quite frustrating also. So,
why's that?
Well, it's annoying. It moves and it expands and it contracts and it warps and it splits and and it changes color, and it's a moving playing field. It's and so it has its own frustrations for me. And I think I'm the sort of guy who has an idea in my mind of what I want to make and want to be in control of the material. And actually it's taken me 10 years post-graduating to realize that actually you can't be in control of it. And actually it's good fun to let it do its own thing sometimes, as long as you're in control. But I think the trouble with wood and woodwork is that, it can be a really hypnotizing material, and people can get sort of sucked into making and sucked into the grain of the timber to such an extent that it kind of blurs their focus on what they're actually making, and they get so into the joints and the craftsmanship of it that actually they forget about the design of it. And I think I've always been aware of trying to strike a very clear balance between craftsmanship and design, so one doesn't overpower the other. And I think it's really important when it comes to woodwork to try and strike a harmony, really.
Mm. So what was your work like when you graduated, Gareth?
I made a chest of drawers that I called COD. or an of drawers, because it didn't have a chest. So it had sort of walnut drawers that were all curved and carved on the front. And they ran on CNC'd aluminium drawer runners. And then there was kind of glass sides that were tempered to, make them hard enough to be a carcass of a cabinet. So that was one of the pieces I made. So, and then I made a chair called thoracic that was a repetition of a CNC component. So even the university in 1995 had a CNC machine. So, and I made an object.
It was called what? Sorry,
it's called thoracic, like the rib cage, thoracic. So it was a repetition of a similar rib shape that created a chair. And it was my idea that would be a production piece, but it had so many sheets of plywood took to make it that could never have been a production piece of furniture. There was explorative, and I think post university, without the kind of structure and network of friends and tutors, then the work went really wild and creatively unhinged as I moved myself out of any support networks and into the countryside, and it started becoming more and more weird and wonderful, but incredibly sort of, I think, they probably haven't aged very well, those objects, or I know they haven't aged very well.
So, as I was alluding to in my intro, I first came across your work in 2007, 2008 with the Anne sideboard. It seems to be, as we've pointed out, there was similar thinking with that object as there was with a much later hack chair. Only in this case, it was a Queen Anne side table from the 1730s attempting to emerge from a block of wood that looked like it had been CNC machined, but in actual fact, you'd made it by hand with a bench saw. Why did you decide to make it that way?
Economics is a straightforward answer. I knew it could be done on a CNC machine, but I really didn't have any money at the time, and I needed to make something with the funds that I had, and I could make it by hand, so I did. It took me 5 days to make those. Well, actually, I made 9 legs to start with, and I ended up with 4 that were usable. So I just knew I could, so I did. And I mean, it wasn't very nice, and it was. At one point, I cut a leg in half and was nearly in tears because I just turned the orientation of the piece of wood the wrong way around. But yeah, there was a lot of setting up of height of the saw blade with the calipers, and yeah, I had to be pretty patient to do it. But the results were really, really fun to see as it started revealing itself. I'd done samples on a bandsaw, so I knew that the result was really fun.
It was an economic decision.
It was an economic decision, but why use digital technology if you don't need to? I mean, it's not, I agree there's certain things you can only do with a CNC machine or a digital technology, and at that point it's right to do that. But actually, sometimes it's so much quicker to do something by hand than it is to even use a laser cutter at times. And I think, teaching a lot, I teach at University of Brighton, and the students always think that they have to use the digital technology to create a result. And, you don't. You can just so easily do it with old-fashioned methods. And people need to remember that. It's not necessarily faster, and it's not necessarily easier with a CNC machine or a digital technology.
There's a lovely quote from you that I read at the time that I think is kind of interesting, where you told, Crafts magazine, in fact, that the dream would be to work for some of the big manufacturers on products that more people can afford. At the moment, the objects are quite elitist. And I think you were talking to Zanotta at the time, the Italian contemporary furniture manufacturer. I'm guessing that ambition must have changed down the years.
I'm not sure it changed, but I still love the idea of designing for some big manufacturers, and I have designed stuff for UK manufacturers such as sort of SCP, Case, Heels, but it's hard work, and the royalties that you get from these things are not very much money. And also, in a way, my other work was much more successful. So the one-off, the limited edition, more creative pieces were a lot more successful for me. So I guess I sort of went with what was working better. But I still try. I still love trying to pare things back to be really, really minimal. And I'm working on a dining table now for myself, which is ironic considering we can't have anyone round to eat at the house. But I'm interestingly enough, I'm making something very simple and very pared back and very structural and economic with materials. So I still have a passion to try and make things and design things in that way.
So IKEA one day.
I'd take the job if it was offered. Yeah. Yeah.
So look, the next time our paths crossed was in Clisset Wood in Herefordshire in 2010, where you took part in the Bodging Milano project, which was started by Chris Eckelsley, the artist and designer, and Rory Dodd, who's the co-founder of Designers Block. For the listeners, can we describe what that was about?
Yeah, I guess it was a sort of a research trip into Windsor chair making for 5 days, using just green woodworking, traditional bodging woodwork, traditional Windsor chair making. And then at the end of the 5 days, all that work was going to the Milan Furniture Fair with Rory and Designers Block. So we started the process. Gudrun, who runs the course,
Gudrun Litz,
yeah. She had Chris had done the course previously and made a Windsor chair, and he thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if some designers came along and tried to make an interpretation of the Windsor chair, or made a chair using these technologies, not even an interpretation, but for example, Carl Clarkin tried to make his grandmother tubular steel furniture chair, so he didn't make a Windsor chair in any way. But at the end of the 5 days, we all the furniture was put on a truck and went straight to Milan. So it was quite a baptism of fire into an area of woodwork I hadn't previously had experience with.
Yeah, because I think it's important to emphasize that there was no electricity. You were using pole lathes. There were no kind of contemporary modern tools, and it was all done kind of in the woods without cover. I was there. I visited on a couple of occasions, and out of everybody there, it seemed to have quite a profound effect on you, I thought.
Yeah, I would definitely say you're right. It changed the course of my thinking and the type of objects I made, and exactly the things that I left with were the fact that this wonderful chair, I was very, I loved what I made. I was really, really pleased with it, and the fact that no power had been used, in making it, really had an effect on me. Alongside the fact that I'd been in workshops for years with noisy sanders and planers and all that gear. And actually, you realize when you take and pare it all back to the very basics, it's a really wonderful, beautiful thing. And just to be able to hear the birds and be outside and be making and be with your friends, and live in the wood and live off a fire was just great, and I loved every minute of it. So, and the weather was absolutely shocking. So it wasn't like we were sort of out midsummer. It was before Milan, so it was soggy old wood, that's for sure, at that time of year.
Because it seemed to inform this notion of sustainability, or it seemed to inform your next project, which was called In Pursuit of Carbon Negative. And here again, you cycled to, I think, a different wood in Herefordshire, made some products without the use of electricity, and cycled them back to SCP in Shoreditch in London. What was the thinking behind that? Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I guess, had been working at Brighton, and Brighton had got a strong, the 3D design and craft course there had got a strong environmental credentials, and they teach it wonderfully, and they have a great MA. And there was a guy there called Jonathan Chapman at the time who had written a book on the subject. And I'd read his book, and that had also helped change me at the same time. The book's called Emotionally Durable Design, by the way, so by Jonathan Chapman. So that's worth a look at. And it's the idea that, if we keep objects for longer and want to live with them for longer, then we'll be doing more to the environment. And at the same time as this, I sort of Establish and Sons had been interested in taking my love seat and mass producing it, and they said to me, "Where do you want to mass produce it? Do you want to?"
This is the love seat you made in Clisset Wood.
Exactly, yeah. And that they said, "Oh well, there's great makers in China, or factories in China," and I thought to myself, well, this is what's beautiful about this object is all the fact that it was made in a woodland, and can't we make this thing mass produced in a woodland for you? And we kind of got the all clear, and a tree was felled in this woodland in Hereford, not very far from Clisset Woods. Joe and Paul Morton, who run courses, and they felled this tree, and they were happy for me to come and make these love seats for Establish and Sons. And Establish and Sons went through some change at that time, and the project was pulled. And I couldn't believe it. And we had this felled ash tree lying in a woodland. So I had to rethink the project. And that's when the idea of In Pursuit of Carbon Negative came along, about the idea of, can we make a product that takes more carbon from the environment than we put into the environment when we make it? So with a combination of help from Sheridan and SCP and Brighton University and some people who did a life cycle analysis, we took on the mission of trying to get all the way to this woodland, taking dairy and meat out of my diet, and get to the woodland and make all the furniture and bring it all back over 9 days, using as little carbon as possible while we did it.
It sounds almost as though you were going through a kind of designer's version of a midlife crisis.
I've had loads of those. Yeah. They come every 3 years.
Well, you wrote at the time, "I'm just a 38-year-old man who has decided to question what he designs, what he makes, and what it's for."
Ooh, that's right. I think that's something we, and I'm now a 45-year-old man who questions what he makes and what he designs and what it's for. I mean, I think it's something we should constantly ask ourselves. The project was wonderful. The resulting objects were quite raw and rough and ready, but actually the project proved very, very successful. And actually the amount of lectures that I've done where I've just talked about that very project and about the carbon footprint and the idea of how we look at life from a slightly different perspective, and how we consider the environment we work in, has, I think, had an effect on lots of graduates and university students, and so it's proved very successful. Ultimately, my dream of sailing to America, delivering the products on a low carbon footprint delivery system, failed. But there are other people who are building wonderful, great businesses that do, really consider these things. And so I'm pleased that, I have been part of trying to think about, those materials and the impact pieces of furniture have on the environment.
I guess in some ways it also led you on to this project you did with Kevin Gauld up in the northernmost point of Scotland, which was to reinvent or redesign the Orkney chair, which, I mean, I don't know if listeners know, but it's a vernacular piece of furniture traditionally made by farmers in the island from materials they could get their hands on. So straw from the fields, wood that had washed up on the beaches. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I'd got invited to do it. So it was a paid design project. However, after the Bodging Milano project, Chris had kind of discovered Kevin and had approached Kevin about us coming up to Scotland and doing a very similar sort of project with him. However, it never happened. And then when I got approached by the New Craftsman to design a project for the kind of launch of their company, Catherine Locke, one of the directors there, she, was a big fan of the Orkney chair, and had a very similar idea to Chris's and my interest in the Orkney chair. So, it was there. It was an instant idea, and it's just been one of the most rewarding collaborative objects that I've made. I mean, it's just been such a wonderful thing. So, and it keeps going on. So I went up there with a kit of bits in a suitcase. I designed a chair literally in a few days. Didn't really have time to mock it up very much. The aesthetic was that of a southern design or a southern Windsor chair frame thinking, and as if that had bred with an Orkney chair, and we kind of created this between us. We created this hybrid of a design somewhere that sat in between the two, or was born from that collaboration of a southerner and a Orcadian. So I arrived in Orkney with a kit of bits. We assembled it in Kevin's workshop with Sydney, his uncle, kind of filming us, and my dad actually came up with me, and he was stripping straw by the fire, keeping ourselves warm in Kevin's workshop, and we just worked for 5 days, cracking on making a piece of furniture, and in the hope that we got a successful output from it, and Kevin's still making them, and there's lots more products in the in the range now, and we've sold one of the chairs to the V&A just recently. So and it's now on display, but sadly the V&A is closed at the moment. But it's now on display with the other two Orkney chairs that they have in their collection. So.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
How did the project go down with the other traditional Orkney chair makers on the island? There are about 3 or 4, I think.
I need to be careful. Well, one other maker has taken a real kind of dislike to what Kevin's done. So, he's seen the Orkney chair as a sacred object that shouldn't be messed with. But Kevin, being much more open-minded than perhaps other furniture chair makers, I mean, he's really enjoyed it. But it was great because when we finished the chair, people, as we were getting on with it, people would come in, and the Orcadians are lean with their words, and so they wouldn't say a lot, and they'd look at the object and question it and and over it, and then at the end they came to see it, and they were sat on it and thought, oh, it's comfortable, isn't it? And yeah, this is a really nice thing. So I think we won a few over. I'm not sure how many Orcadians we've won over. There's nothing quite like the Orkney chair as an aesthetic. So, we haven't, I haven't tried to, I never like to say I've redesigned the Orkney chair. I've just made a contemporary chair using Orcadian straw work. So yeah, it's just lovely that it's still done in Orkney, and we send the bits up, and Kevin still does all the straw work, and you know, he's has other people helping him do the straw work, so it keeps business there, which is really, really vital for the economy of Orkney.
You've described yourself as, and I'm going to quote you here, a bit of a gambler. Can we unpick that? What do you mean by that?
I guess, I mean, I described a bit of that gambling, I suppose, with the hack chair, the idea that, you make something and you don't quite know what the result might be. So there's a little bit of that. And also I try to challenge the normal rules of woodwork sometimes. And so that can get me into trouble. So, there's a reason why, there's a consistency with sort of making or joints and structure on hardwood furniture, but, and you've got to kind of listen to those rules. But I think to be, progressive in craft, you've got to keep pushing that envelope. And so, I'll take a risk, and sometimes it fails, and sometimes it doesn't work successfully, and sometimes it does. And, that's nice because it moves things on. So I guess that's what I mean. I'll invest sometimes a lot of money in making an object, and if it doesn't sell or it falls flat on its face, then it's a massive loss to the business, because if an object doesn't sell, it's just firewood, really. It's not like I can take it down the scrappies and get, its weight, of the weight value of it back. I can't.
Well, can we talk about Vessel, which seemed to be a product that was very successful, which you made with Zaha Hadid, the late Zaha Hadid, the renowned architect, as part of the wish list in 2014. It's part of a project that was instigated by the American Hardwood Export Council and Benchmark, the furniture company, where they asked a bunch of, up-and-coming designers and makers to create pieces for some very famous designers and makers. What was it like working with Zaha?
Well, it was amazing. She's, got such an amazing setup. I mean, the amount of direct contact I had with her was quite minimal, as you can imagine. But the way it opened my eyes to digital designing was something really very special. And, those particular objects, are really, wouldn't have come about if it wasn't for that relationship that we developed, or the fact that they were open and allowed me to come in and work with them. So, yeah, she was amazing. And actually, when I did meet her, everyone was so scared of her that it was kind of odd that people could have sort of held her in such high esteem that they couldn't really be themselves. So when I did meet her, no one introduced us, and I sort of thought, God, what's happening? I thought someone would introduce us, and I just said to her, I bet you're wondering who the hell everyone is, aren't you? I was like, I'm Gareth. I'm the guy we've been collaborating together with, So that moment of meeting her and breaking the ice with her, she warmed to me because I was just myself in front of her. And actually, we managed to get these wonderful objects from the project, and, we managed to get contracts from, to do limited editions of them and sell them as a collaborative piece, which is wonderful.
I mean, just to kind of describe the piece that you did. I mean, you created this vase that looked like it had been kind of stretched. You did it using a 5-axis CNC machine.
No, we didn't. No, 3-axis.
Oh, didn't you?
Yeah, so a flatbed machine. So a very simple CNC machine, actually.
Okay. So in terms of the collaboration, how much of you was in there, and how much of Zaha and her office?
That's a good question. And I don't think I know the answer. They wouldn't have looked like that if it hadn't been for her office, and they wouldn't have looked like that if it hadn't been for me. So, I mean, I had a I did most of the design work, and I showed them sketches, and then they rendered up and interpreted my drawings. But they came out with that kind of a bit of a Zaha brand about it, with this very fast flowing look. Whereas, they'd picked up on my lines and sketch lines in the sketchbook, and and excuse me, and had interpreted them differently. So, and then we began to, because I sat in the offices for 3 days with a guy, a modeler, and we worked together. So I'd say it was 50-50 really. But yeah, they're very fast flowing, and they have a human touch, and we kind of reference traditional making techniques or ceramic making techniques as if it was a thumbed pot, but made a pot that looked impossible to make. And so, yeah, I mean, that's sort of was my thinking. And I'd also been to Ethiopia previously and gone to the dugout churches in Lalibela, and there, you enter these dugout churches from these tunnels. So, we tried to capture a bit of that magic of having this kind of these points or these perspectives where you were drawn to the interior space of the object. Obviously you couldn't get there, but you were drawn visually to it. It was great, really. I mean, and what I should add, I'd like to say one thing about them, sorry, is that I don't think I would have got that project had I not done the In Pursuit of Carbon Negative project. And because there was a life cycle analysis done with that project as well. And I think the fact that I'd done that previous project and been interested in the life cycle analysis of my In Pursuit of Carbon Negative project is one of the contributing factors to why I got the opportunity to do that project.
And more recently, you've attempted to, reinvent the wheel, which is a show at the Craft Study Centre in Farnham, which came to a close, I think at the beginning of this year. Have you changed the wheel, Gareth?
Well, I didn't. I mean, you can't. That's why it looks like a mammoth kind of thing from a prehistoric era. So we were asked to look at this wheel that had been made by Stuart Sturr, a wheelwright that had his wheelwright shop in Farnham. And he wrote a book right at the end of the kind of industry of wheelwrights. Not that it's ever ended, there are still wheelwrights, but it would have been a mass industry at one time, like tire shops are on our streets now to get your tire punctures fixed. And so it would have been every high street would have had a wheelwright on it. And he inherited his father's practice after the war, and he didn't ever feel particularly like he knew enough about wheelwrighting to ever be a master. Anyway, he wrote a book about this trade, and we were all asked to make wheels in response to this bit of text. And I just thought, well, the thing with a traditional wooden wheel is it couldn't have got any better. It was a design that had evolved over millennia to make the most out of wood, to make the strongest wheel possible, the most easily repaired and fixed and replaced wheel. And so there was no way we could ever improve a wooden wheel. So I took an imaginary look back into time, and we made a very playful booklet about the evolution of the wheel and all those milestones that makers may have had as we got off our knees and we moved rocks on logs all the way until we got to the horse and cart. So it was good fun. So I made a ginormous 2-meter round wheel with an axe.
I've taken up loads of your time. You've got to get back to your family. I've got dinner waiting for me downstairs. So kind of towards the back end of this, Where do you think the crafts world is at the moment? On one hand, it seems to have gained traction in places it never had before. On the other, you've got things like the Heritage Crafts Association's Red List that attempts to illustrate how many skills are on the verge of extinction. So, what's the truth of it, in your opinion?
Well, where it is right now at this very moment is unknown, I suppose.
Yes, that's true.
So where it was pre-COVID, I think it was in a strong place. It was in a great place. You know, a lot of celebration of the past, which I love but worry about, is this idea. I call it kind of caveman craft, but you know, this aesthetic. I was slightly worried about the celebration of kind of, you know, lamenting too much in the past, and I'm a great advocate of the progression of it. So, but I think craft's been in quite a good space. However, and you know, the opening of the new Crafts Council gallery is exciting, and it feels like we're at quite a good moment. However, I mean, I've got to reach out to all those makers out there now who can't get to work, who can't buy the materials, or commissions have fallen through for them, and whose businesses are literally, the pause button has been put on, well, not just craft industries, but every industry and every family. So I think, you know, it's what place craft will be when this moment's over is going to be really interesting, and it's going to be a difficult time for craft, I should imagine. Maybe we'll look back, and in this peace and tranquility of us spending precious time with our loved ones, and that actually we'll start. It may help us appreciate the important things in life, and that for me is handmade objects and beautifully crafted things, and or well considered and well designed and made things. So maybe it will help us along the way.
Well, we shall see. Gareth, I think that's a poignant place to leave it. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for asking me. It's been great. Cheers.
And to learn more about Gareth's work, go to garethneal.co.uk. Or if you're interested in purchasing, go to the Sarah Myerscough Gallery website, which is sarahmyerscough.com. There are images from the interviews, as well as little films and other things on my Instagram page, Grant on Design. If you've enjoyed listening and want to see this podcast flourish, then please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this from. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope you're all staying really well.